sleep. Goddamn hacker, that second time tonight that asshole's cut in.
A warm welcome, subscribers, to Red Ice Creations Radio. We are talking to Nick Begich, and we are going to spend some time this second segment here to talk more about mind control and technology. I'd like to ask you, Nick, kind of when you first began looking at this area, so to speak, of mind control for people interested in technology and various applications of different technologies. There actually is a lot of material out there that connects with mind control, yet it seems to be that very few people kind of really go into this subject and really studied it. So my question is, what kind of opened up this area for you?
Well, going back from for me, it was my interest in electrophysiology, the effect of electromagnetic fields on the human body. One of my mentors, Dr. Michaela, was from Finland and was one of the brightest electrophysiologists. His daughter now carries on his work. In fact, has advanced her own work in this field quite substantially. But that was my beginning of interest in what you could do, first with the body, and then, of course, the mind. And then back in the 1980s, I started getting interested in some of the body-mind enhancement technologies that were being developed. Some of the things being learned about the brain in terms of driving frequency responses by being able to create oscillating fields of various kinds, whether you use light or specific ways of manipulating sound, or electromagnetic fields or other radio frequency fields. Virtually any energy source that you could pulse, pump in a very specific way, you could create all kinds of effects. And that kind of got me thinking more in terms of enhancing human potentials. And then in the course of my research on HAARP, we ran into really a discussion about the opposite. And, something you don't really think about, at least normal people I don't believe think about, sort of how to mess people up by being able to manipulate energy. But unfortunately, that is the stuff of government, both for enhancing human potentials for military purposes or for degrading human operators. In fact, what the military now calls controlled effects. There's an excellent article from June 2004 published in Horizons. It's a publication of the Air Force Research Laboratory here in the United States. And this publication's cover story on controlled effects dealt with the idea of creating artificial sight, sound, touch, taste, and smell by being able to manipulate energy in such a way as to totally trick the brain into hallucinations that would be perceived as reality. Pretty amazing stuff.
Very scary. I guess this is doable because of the nature of how the human brain works, and we essentially just need some kind of electrical input or some kind of even frequency just to affect that. Am I correct?
Well, generally, yeah. What's happened is the research first started, you go way back, and we trace this historically in the book called Controlling the Human Mind. In fact, there's over 300 sources that we actually cited in that book, which lay out the foundation for sort of where the science began. But going back to, say, the 1960s, where there was some real active activity in terms of mapping the brain, to look at the brain and see what happens as you go through different emotions and experiences, to see what parts of the brains literally light up or become energized, or there's focuses or clusters of nerve activity, and neurons are firing. And so all of that kind of mapping started taking place pretty aggressively in the 60s, and there was a guy, Jose Delgado, that many know from the research, was working at Yale University and implanting electrodes to stimulate the brains of primates, humans, and other animals, and as a consequence, figuring out sort of how to make things happen. There's a gentleman, Persinger, in Laurentian University in Canada that was doing similar work, but he was using an external magnetic field where he would manipulate magnetic fields through solenoids to trigger the brain in various ways and create all kinds of artificially induced experiences and emotional responses. An emotional response, relatively easy to create with an artificial oscillator or an external energy source. It's really based upon pretty simple principles, what are called now in the literature a frequency following response, where an external source of energy pulses actually mirrors that external signal. Well, that then causes changes in brain chemistry and consequently changes in emotional state or behaviors. People like Delgado were able to show later, by the 1980s, that he could do this with modulating or pulsing radio frequency energy, very low amounts. In fact, 1/50th of the amount of energy in the radio frequency range as the Earth creates, he was able to change the emotional state of humans and primates like flipping on and off a light switch. Pretty amazing stuff, and that was done in the mid-80s.
Oh my God. You mentioned Michael Persinger out of the Laurentian University, and he did some, as you say, very interesting studies with the, I think he called his device the brain helmet or something like that. And
right.
He did research that suggests that he could, create a state that is similar to if you take LSD or similar substances, but basically through the creation of very weak magnetic fields. And this kind of opens up a whole can of worms, so to speak, if we think about the MK Ultra experiments that was done with LSD, but now apparently then this could actually be induced in some way in with the help of magnetic fields. Any comments on that at all?
Absolutely correct. In fact, he also induced out-of-body experiences, or at least the illusion of them. He created abduction experiences, interestingly enough, using these fields, according to his published research. And he also suggested that you could create the same kind of effect by modulating the magnetic...
Hello, are you still there? Okay, we were just speaking about Michael Persinger. I don't know how far you got before we lost you there, but we were talking a little bit about the basically how abductions scenarios or abductions can be simulated. Do you care to pick up from there?
Sure. The idea that you can stimulate very complex reactions within the brain has been the stuff of Persinger, but he's been mainly focused on emotional states and emotional reaction, and then creating some of these altered, what we would call altered states of consciousness. The reality is, it is based on brain chemistry, but more underlying that brain chemistry are electromagnetic field interactions that then manifest as chemical changes. If you want to look at sort of life from sort of that model, the idea of then bringing in other energy sources that distort or manipulate or deliberately change the underlying energy state then creates that cascade of chemical reactions, and things are then altered within the brain itself. And the idea of synthesizing this really is based upon how good the models are. And here's something that has happened in the last 12 months that's going to dramatically change a lot of this. First of all is the idea of modeling in 3 dimensions in real time the activities within a brain. And this is something that's actually being done this year in Switzerland. There are 3 supercomputers that are supposed to be connected together for analyzing brain activity in 3 dimensions using 3-dimensional MRIs in real time. And what that means is, as you have a thought, you can kind of record that in a way that you can then take that same very complex set of fields and impose them on someone else. This is where this science eventually goes. Now, there's some advances in what's called quantum computing, and why this is important is quantum computing is computing at such a speed that you could sort... let me give you an example. A supercomputer today will take, in 1 second, a supercomputer today can do what is referred to as 280 teraflops a second, which would be equal to 6.6 billion people on the planet with hand calculators every 5 seconds calculating a formula for 60 hours. You can do what the supercomputer of today does in 1 second.
Sheesh.
Now that's a huge amount of information that your supercomputers of today can crunch. But a quantum computer, if we ran that supercomputer for 1 hour, which is a tremendous amount if you think about it, but if you ran it for 1 hour, it would a supercomputer in that same hour could accomplish what that standard computer will do in 1 trillion years.
Oops.
Let me say that again. All those people running those hand calculators for 60 hours to equal 1 second Do it for 1 trillion years, and a supercomputer will do that same amount of calculating in an hour. Now, what will happen then, as we make that next technological breakthrough, the entire brain could be mapped in real time. In other words, complete and complex ideas, thoughts could be transferred at a very high efficiency rate and data rate. And that's what's being predicted for the future. Even here in the U.S., on our PBS, our public broadcasting system, they have a special called the 22nd Century.
Yeah.
And their opening issue, and I'll just read from the cover, it says, the pilot episode, The Worldwide Mind, is about a new theory that suggests in the coming decades, all of our brains will be wired together just as computers were wired together via the World Wide Web during the 1990s, unquote. Now, I don't know how you feel about that as an individual human being, but I think that would be the greatest violation of personal privacy that ever was contemplated by man. And it's not something to look forward to, but I think something to strongly resist. The linking of human brains give us full transparency of the population, and that means full exposure to whatever manipulation is also technologically possible. And the research shows that is quite extensive, especially if you have the ability to interface with the human brain through this kind of design, program design. And that's what's coming, and that's, to a large extent, the work that's been done in this area that stretches back to the first areas where hypnosis was being researched and the potentials of the human brain started to be recognized. But as we look at this whole issue of controlling the human mind is one aspect of it, but even more important, the research in these areas that has been done both independently and by governments led in maybe an unanticipated direction, and that's the direction of consciousness itself and what the human potential might actually be.
Yeah.
And I think most governments are pretty frightened by what an individual potential is. If you consider things that the military now refers to as anomalous human potentials, these things that aren't well explained, whether it be telepathy, telekinesis, or anomalous capacities.
Yeah.
Some believe that they're innate capacities. Some believe that we are actually going through an evolution where these capacities become much more commonplace.
There's so many points in what you just told us here that I want to pick up on. And let's begin at the beginning. I did see that particular program that you just talked about the Worldwide Mind, and I have to agree with you that it's actually one of the most scary things I could possibly imagine for a number of reasons. One is the violation, of course, of the individual, but the other is also, of course, the how should I put it? Who knows what actually would happen if we manage to link up people in that way, because I feel that a lot of people today actually are, so to speak, actually mentally not so stable, and if we were to mix and blend all of these different people from all of these different cultures, we have no idea what would happen. It might be turn out to be something very positive, but as I feel right now, I'm very, very scared by that idea, actually.
You know, and if you think about it, on a natural level, I think we already do this. It's a question of our own sort of evolution and ability. You know, we oftentimes try and duplicate with technologies what nature does so much more efficiently.
Yeah.
And it's sort of our human nature. I mean, we try to do this. It's our creative nature.
Sure.
But there are some things that maybe shouldn't be automated, if you will. I mean, whether it be the voting booth in all of our countries or whether it be the minds of those pulling the lever. You know, there are certain things that absolutely cannot be violated or are called into question in terms of what would